These days, the demands on companies and how they run their business are very different to what they were 2 decades ago, when the balanced scorecard first came out. Our world has changed greatly with the advent of technology, instant communication, the social media, and consumer demands for constant innovation, as well as concern for ethical behavior, such as towards the environment, community building, and aspects that demand corporate social responsibility. I wonder how businesses can measure these elements and put them into execution using Kaplan's balanced scorecard.
The other thing that comes to mind, and this is something that has been happening in the last few years, but the impact has been absolutely exponential, is technology and the way we communicate and the presence of social media. For example, like a wrong tweet can actually make or break a company, for example, and just the whole business environment, especially with the failure of financial institutions. I'm sure they have really good balanced scorecard in how they measure.
Well, fortunately, the ones that failed didn't have balanced scorecards, so we weren't too tainted by it.
So what is happening in terms of how companies and leadership these days have to face things like that? Because it's very everything's very fluid, very it moves very, very fast, and there's a lot of feedback from the consumers and the users in ways that never had that kind of impact.
So we can think of this maybe from two sources. One would be from customers, and maybe we might have objectives or measures that pick up on the kinds of messaging that's coming on from the social media and how they're responding. Or in our language, it could be a strategic initiative, which is to use social media to get closer to the customers. But I think actually another interesting use of this is how to get feedback from employees. And so we talked about the importance of communication and understanding.
They say bad things about the
company.
But
it's actually a great opportunity for employees to tell the company when they think that's really a dumb strategy, or where they see the strategy not working, and so that's much more fluid. And in fact, I know that Microsoft, in its balanced scorecard software with their marketing, they actually have that software connecting to social media. And so it's an opportunity for the employees to provide feedback to the senior executives about where they either where they see opportunities for improvement, or just saying this is dumb and it's not working. And so that's part of the implementation, and I think that is going on.
And also still related to technology, because we see companies that grow. I mean, they start off being very innovative, and then they start growing, and they stop being innovative, and they stop being competitive, and they get surpassed by newer companies. And in measuring the performance, especially for long-term strategy and long-term innovation of the company, what's the best way of making sure that the innovation becomes like a very important part of it?
Okay, well now we're getting somewhat outside the balanced scorecard, though we should have measures on innovation, and we should be measuring innovation relative to competitors. And so certainly we can see examples where this didn't occur. So 10 years ago, the leading mobile phone company was Nokia out of Finland, and then all of a sudden Apple enters their industry from a different industry and really does significant damage.
And Kodak suddenly disappears.
Yeah, Kodak and Sony in consumer electronics. I mean, Sony was the leading consumer electronics company. Had the Walkman, the Discman, the PlayStation. It was all kinds of things, but again, Apple came in and completely disrupted them. So again, it is part of an executive team thinking about this. So one of the great U.S. CEOs, Andy Grove, who was the CEO of Intel in the 1980s. And so his autobiography of that time as CEO was titled, "Only the Paranoid Survive." And you really have to be paranoid, and he's kind of, where is that next innovation coming from that will disrupt our company? And so that's a mindset, I think, that executives have to have.
But you have examples of companies. I've seen companies actually go off tangent because they're focusing too much on measuring, these components and not enough of that. I mean, how can companies actually make sure that they measure the correct thing, I suppose, you know.
Well, the thing you want to be measuring is, are you, if you're following a product leadership strategy, you know, as Nokia was, but Apple is now, then that's what you have to measure. And the measures you have to use have to reflect that innovation strategy.
Sometimes they fail first before they start thinking about.
Yeah, no. And it's hard. I'm not saying just because you measure it, you're going to be innovative. I mean, someone still has to understand the marketplace, or in the case of Steve Jobs, anticipate where the marketplace will be. And you know, that's still a lot of inspiration that goes on there. I mean, it's a difficult strategy to sustain over long periods of time.
The other thing that comes to mind when running a business in this competitive market is knowing about the risks involved and how to manage those risks. As risk is part of business, risk management should be inherent in all business operations. However, risk is something the companies often overlook until at least something goes wrong, and it becomes a crisis. I'm interested to know how managing risk could be part of the company's strategy that needs to be implemented.
I mean, risk is very much a part of you know, the world that business moves in. I mean, is this something that you also deal with when in terms of...
Yeah, no, I've been dealing with that a lot. I mean, we finished the execution premium in 2008, just as we went into the global financial crisis. And so I've been thinking about risk and working on that since then, because...
And what do you have to say about risk?
It's really it's really complex and interesting and challenging, and I think most companies don't do it very well. They have only a kind of a limited version of risk.
Why is that, do you think? Is it because they're risk averse, or is it because they're...
No, a lot of it, they think of the risks that they're familiar with are what I call compliance risks. You know, employees doing the wrong thing, and or they're worrying about theft of assets.
Legal stuff.
Yeah, and so they delegate risk to a compliance officer. And but it's the interesting risk, and this is what I've been working on, are the strategy risks. And any strategy has a risk. You can't, you know, if you don't have a risk, you don't have a strategy.
Such as, give me examples.
Well, any new product that that you have is a risk that it won't sell. I mean, you can spend hundreds of millions of dollars developing a new product, but you don't know if it'll be successful. So every new product development is a risk. Every expansion into a new market is a risk. Even something at making a loan to somebody, there's a risk that they may not pay it back. I mean, we can do a credit score, but there's always a residual risk that that person will default. So risk is inherent to the strategy, and so the goal of risk management should not be to make companies less risky, because with higher risk comes higher rewards. What it should be is how to identify the risks that you're taking on and then mitigate them, reduce the likelihood or reduce the impact by, there's certain actions you can take in advance that'll make, if the risk event shows up, make it less adverse to the company.
Now, since your book came out, do you see more companies becoming sort of more risk savvy, or at least...
Oh yeah, no, they are. And again, it has to be very sobering. I mean, when you have companies that have existed for decades or more than a century, like Lehman Brothers or Merrill Lynch or Bear Stearns, go out of business. And basically, General Motors and Chrysler both went bankrupt. And so that's got to really be sobering. I mean, how do companies put themselves in a position where, you know, they go bankrupt, they go out of business, and no company wants to have that happen. And so that at least makes them open to thinking, you know, how can we get better at identifying the risks that we have and taking actions that will mitigate them. But, I mean, we can see it. I mean, it's in the headlines this week with Boeing's Dreamliner. There's this new aircraft. Radical new design.
But what do you see as what's happening in that? Because, you know, this is the airplane that everybody's been waiting for. You know,
but this is a perfect example of, you know, they're taking a risky strategy and it doesn't always work out. And so, and I've studied this, and even before the incidents of the last 2 weeks, that you know, they took a radical step to build a plane that's more than 50% made out of plastic. They'd never done this before, composite material. And they also did something else major that they had never done before, which is delegated to their suppliers most of the design and engineering and fabrication of the plane. And you know, so the plane was 3 years late, $10 billion over budget, because they didn't appreciate how much risk they were taking on with these two radical steps of making it out of material where they had some familiarity with, but never make more than 50% of it out of that. Now you might say, well, why would you ever do that? Well,
because I haven't read your book.
no, it was a good idea. I mean, if you make the plane lighter, then it uses less fuel, so fuel's gotten expensive and it's polluting, and it can fly longer distances. So in principle, it's a great idea, but you have to recognize if you do something like that, and something as complicated as an aircraft, that you better spend a lot of time thinking about what can go wrong.